And welcome, you're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. The issue of reintegrating of the currently occupied Donbas regions back to Ukraine is being actively discussed on different levels for the 5th year now. But there's still no simple answer on what methods should be used to achieve this goal. So what do Ukrainians think about this? The answer to that question was provided by the recent survey conducted by Ukrainian sociologists. To talk more about the results of this survey, we're joined in the studio today by Maria Zolkina. She's a political analyst at Democracy Initiatives Foundation. Hello, Maria. Thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So let's talk about the survey. This survey shows that most of the people who participated in it, living in the mainland Ukraine and in the occupied territories of Donbas as well, are for keeping and maintaining relationship in between these two territories, except for economical ones.
The only one issue I would like to underline is that we didn't conduct the poll in the occupied territories, only in that part of the Donbas which is controlled by Ukrainian government. And yes, you're absolutely right. The main tendency which is actually present in the field of public opinion is since 2016-2017 is that people are not ready to build any kind of the wall with the occupied territories and are mainly in favor of preserving almost all the possible social, humanitarian, economic, namely horizontal relations with the people. So people make the division between administrative and political relations with occupied territories because administrative or political or even economic relations means some kind of relations with the self-proclaimed republics. Like authorities, but at the same time they divided another part of relations with those territories, relations with ordinary people, and in the form of preserving their right to free move from the occupied territories to controlled by Ukrainian government part of Donbas and Ukraine, and what was very what was important in my opinion is that we have discovered that people are more in favor of restoring the payment of different kind of social payments and as well pensions to people living there.
In exchange for what?
In the change for nothing, just in favor of having some kind of channels of communication with those people and fulfilling maybe the obligations of Ukrainian state, because it is not about Minsk agreements, it is more about Ukrainian constitution. And people working with the law, they actually underline all the time that it is not according to Ukrainian domestic legislation to refuse to pay especially pensions, because they are not the social payments. They are absolutely different kind of public payments to ordinary people. And what we have found out that, for instance, the current state of affairs, when we do not have the economic relations, we have the movement of people, the movement of people crossing the division line, and we do not have those payments and pensions paid to people from occupied territories. This state of affairs is supported like by 40% of the population of Ukraine and not supported by 51% of the population. When we ask people about a little bit different format, when we do not have the economic relations, but we will add,
do have humanitarian relations.
We do have the humanitarian relations, especially the restoration of those pensions paid to people from that part of the Donbas. We have the vice versa division of public opinion, like 50% are in favor of such a model of relations with those territories, and 40% are not in favor of that. So it means that the division is very slight one. But in general, when we go deeper into finding out what concrete steps will people support in order, humanitarian steps, in order to have the channel of communication with the citizens from occupied territories, we have actually the proof that people are more in favor of soft instruments when it comes to relations with people, and rather strict instruments or hard instruments when it comes to relations with self-proclaimed authorities.
Speaking of authorities, that was also the question on the survey, and the points of view were different, because people living in the mainland Ukraine, they are in favor of such a variant that the local authorities, even in self-proclaimed republics of the occupied territories of Donbas, should be appointed by the Ukrainian government, whereas people living in Donbas think that those authorities, local authorities, should be voted for by residents of Donbas and the occupied territories as well. Now, how would that affect the actual reintegration process?
It was a little bit different opinion about the future self-government authorities, like local councils and local administrations. So people think really that it should be organized like everywhere in Ukraine, and they should be elected by locals at the local elections. But when it comes to, for instance, the idea of or the question of appointment of local police or local judicial system bodies, so it is really a little bit different attitude when it comes to public opinion in the controlled part of the Donbas, where the public opinion is divided between the ideas that, for instance, the local police should be appointed by the central government or by central authorities, partly and partly by locals. For instance, the chief part of police bodies, they should be appointed by Kiev, if we can say in this way, and people working in the police on the local or regional level, they should be appointed on the local or regional level. This is one part of public opinion in controlled part of the Donbas, and another part, which is almost the same one, like 1/3 for that and in 1/3 in favor of another variant, is that people to the local police should be appointed by the central government fully, like 100%. Everybody should be appointed from the center. So it is divided public opinion in the controlled part of the Donbas. But when it comes to average results all over the country, people are mainly in favor on the average level that everything should be organized like everywhere in Ukraine and like it is now, that everything, that the process of appointment of even local police should be under the umbrella of central government, so like it is actually now. But it is really the question of which divides a little bit the public opinion, because people are more, and I think that this tendency will be maybe actual not only for the controlled part of the Donbas, but also for other eastern, southern, and maybe even central part of Ukraine, because in the framework of decentralization or in the framework of any other kind of reform in the field of procurement system or law enforcement bodies, so people are more in favor of having more or less but influence on who is appointed when it comes to judicial bodies, or at least to have the high level of transparency of this process when it is made by the central authorities.
Speaking of the Ministry of Temporarily Occupied Territories and Internally Displaced Persons, what are the opinions of people living in the mainland Ukraine and in Donbas about the ministry and about the functions of the institute? Really, it was also one of the one of the important also parts of the survey, because people all over Ukraine and as in controlled part of the Donbas as well are ready for such a scenario when people from
such fields like education, healthcare system, they may preserve their jobs after restoration of control of Ukraine over those territories. So they should not be lustrated, or they not should be dismissed just because they continued working in the healthcare or education system in the period of occupation. But at the same time, people are absolutely not ready for the same scenario or for the same approach towards people working for different kind of bodies, political, administrative bodies, for self-proclaimed republics. It means that no representatives of current illegal councils, local administrations, and of course of the central government of self-proclaimed republics, they are not, they should not be treated like ordinary for instance, public officials or like ordinary teachers or, I don't know, representatives even of healthcare institutions. But there is a problem because, of course, this is very this is not a deep result in terms of we do not have certainty about whether people treat, for instance, the representatives, ordinary representatives of, for instance, the ministry of self-proclaimed republics, whether they are in favor of lack of illustration for those people, because they are part of the system. They are not the high officials in the self-proclaimed republics, but they continue to work on the very lowest level, like I don't know, secretary or something like that. So people are not in favor now. It seems that they are not in favor of like presenting them opportunity to continue to work in future Ukrainian legislative body. But I think that the general division is that local and not local, but the low level and the average level of different kind of institutions, so people working there should not be illustrated, but when it comes to high officials and to political and administrative bodies, so people should be illustrated according to Ukrainian legislation.
Speaking of high-ranking officials, the points of view about the question who is the most active supporter of the reintegration idea differ between people who live on the mainland Ukraine and people who live in Donbas. People who live on the mainland Ukraine mainly chose President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, as the most eager supporter of the idea of Donbas being reintegrated into the mainland Ukraine back. Whereas people living in Donbas named Yuri Boyko. Why?
Because we all understand that the opposition bloc has been using the same rhetoric that was used by the previous authorities, like the previous party in power, the Party of Regions. And despite the fact that they tried to divide themselves from the past, the electorate does not make this division, and all those ideas, they are accepted like the ideas of the party, which is caring about the interests of the electorate in south and in eastern part of Ukraine, as well in the Donbas. At the same time, people in Donbas are still maybe still have some kind of the hope, and not only in Donbas, but in east and south as well, and in south even in a much more visible way. They still have some kind of a hope that there might be calm relations with Russia after finding the solution for the conflict. Yes, and in my opinion, it is rather logical reaction, psychological reaction of the people on the average level, because yesterday we had the clear regional division when half of the country was in favor of close political and economic relations with Russia in the framework of the customs union. People became disappointed in that idea, but it doesn't mean that they automatically will become the supporters or adherents of pro-European way of development of Ukraine, pro-Euro-Atlantic one, and at the same time that they will become supporters of, let's say, pro-Western politicians or pro-European politicians, like the president who is in favor of Ukraine membership in NATO and EU. So we still have this reason for more loyal relation to some politicians like Boyko, who is from the past list of more or less, let's say, good politicians for the eastern and south of Ukraine. At the same time, people are disappointed with the results of public policy towards Donbas. And I think that the question is not only with Yuri Boyko or opposition bloc, the question is with the current evaluation of what was done and what was not done in the framework of coherent public policy towards restoration of Donetsk and Lugansk region after the beginning of the conflict. So people are not disappointed with the current state of affairs. They do not understand what is the position of the state towards restoration and rehabilitation of the region. They do not see the strategy towards occupied territories. They see the chaos when it comes to understanding whether there is one approach to what the idea what to do with those territories, what is acceptable. No, so people are more or less frustrated when it comes to their understanding of what current authorities thinks about Donbas and what to do with Donbas. And that is why they are more ready to listen to those who propose simpler solutions for the peace, for restoration, and many other things, like being the part of the opposition.
Thank you so much for coming and clarifying the whole survey results for us. That was Maria Zolkina. She's a political analyst at Democracy Initiatives Foundation. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned with UATV for the rest.